Why is it so important for us mothers to train our children to be polite? So let's just think about our cultural narrative because we, as mothers, as women, need to understand the lay of the land. What are we up against, right? And I think it's important for us to just understand that once upon a time, being polite was a norm. People greeted each other. There was a sense of reverence for the human person. I got in trouble when I didn't greet people when I passed by. It was this sense of respect for the older people in the room. And it was a norm. You got in trouble when you didn't greet people. And now we've kind of almost forgotten the beauty of the most simple, basic things in life, as little as greeting someone. Being polite is no longer common practice, but it is common sense. If I go up to you and say, do you want to have polite children? Do you want to be around polite people? Your answer would inevitably be say, of course I do. Who doesn't want to be around somebody who's polite? The even deeper question is, how hard is it? Or how repelled are you when people are rude and impolite, when they don't know how to say thank you, when they don't have manners, when they're rude to you? Why? Because it puts division, it causes frustration for people. And so some of the most basic human way to communicate and create deeper connection is almost lost, like the entry point of connection, such as being polite. Forget deep connection, but the entry point of connection where you're just connecting in a very sort of shallow level. And that begins with being polite. We live in a crisis of loneliness. It's declared international crisis that now people are lonely. So let's reverse engineer what has caused people loneliness in a world where we are hyper connected through social media. We can in a hot second get a hold of anyone and everyone. And yet there's a lack of I would say fulfillment in relationship. Well, if we reverse engineer it, it goes back to the fact that we are having a lot of shallow connections and not a lot of depth. Depth is where we are nourished. We talk about deep, meaningful things. Now, if we reverse engineer it and we don't know how to greet people, we don't know how to be polite, we don't know how to engage people in a way that makes them feel good about who they are, then we can't even get to that level of depth. Now, going back to the importance of teaching our children to be polite, well, what happens in a world where children are impolite is that they're now wondering, we're now seeing the radical, dramatic impact of loneliness trickling down from generations of adults are lonely, now children are lonely. And if we really go even deeper, we're not training our children to have deep, meaningful connection, but even deeper, the beginning of all that, training our children with simple, basic manners and skill set and being polite to actually open the door for connections. So it's important that we pay attention to the layers of impact that lack of politeness has, and also the layers of positive impact of raising children that are polite. So if you're somebody out there and listening, you're saying, well, I've never really thought it was a big deal. It's not really a big deal until it compounds and it creates havoc in our culture, where you walk into a middle school, you walk into elementary school, and everybody's tethered to their phone. Nobody's smiling, nobody's greeting. And we wonder why not everybody, some children are, suffering from anxiety and loneliness and stress and have to be on medication. Maybe we could cure half of that, if not more of the crisis, if we just taught them actually how to engage each other. And it begins with learning basic manners as, being polite with each other. So what does being polite, training your children to be polite do? Well, number one, it opens doors of opportunity for them. If you've ever walked in a room and, I have 8 children, and my children's friends that come in and they're like, good morning, Mrs. Donovan. How are you today? It's so nice to see you. You just want to give them fruit. You just want to make them dinner. You want to take them to the beach with you because they're so pleasant to be around, meaning doors of opportunities open for them, right? So if you train your child to be polite, it also means that maybe somebody could say, hey, I want you to meet this kid because they would make a great worker. People will want to connect your child to opportunities, to possibilities, simply because they're polite, right? I mean, it's so simple. But all of a sudden, all these opportunities show up with your child simply because they know how to engage and make what people feel important. That's what being polite is. They know how to respect people. Polite is teaching people the most basic common gesture of respect. Number two, it reinforces their self-esteem, their ability to like themselves. Why? Because when you're polite, then people are polite back and they're nice back at you, and your child gets to see, oh, the world is nice. Well, it was because they were nice to the world, and the world was just nice back to them. But if your child is rude and they're jumping around and they don't have any discipline and they don't have any basic manners, somebody's going to give them an evil eye. Why? Because maybe they're being disruptive unknowingly. It's not their fault. We have to teach them and train them. But now they're getting the dirty looks. Then they're getting yelled at by somebody. Then you're yelling at them instead of training them the most important basic habits of politeness that would reinforce people smiling at them. They get to see the world as good, not as people are just rude and mean. And then it spirals sort of the negativity. Number three, they learn that just by simply being polite, they could make people happy, which is an act of contribution, bringing joy to the world, bringing light into every room they walk into. They get to have a sense of responsibility at a very young age of how they can actually create a radical impact in a room as a young child, as a teenager, simply by the way they greet the people around them and smile. Is this a challenge right now in our culture? You bet it is. It is for me, even though I train my children, even though I sometimes sound like a broken record, even though I sit my children down, my teenagers, my children, and walk them through the script, train them how to say it, bring awareness when they're not doing it. Why? Because there's a lack of reinforcement around them of the magnitude of the importance of being polite. My children come back to me and say, well, nobody does that, Mom. Well, I tell them, well, I'm not raising you like everyone else. But it is a bit more of a challenge because it's not being reinforced in school. You have to put in your homework, but then the teacher is not even polite at you. They're not even smiling. Some of them are unhappy with who they are. So they're not really happy back at our children. I had this great story with one of my role models, Chris Crone, and he decided to pull his kids out, to homeschool them because they were having their teachers meeting, and this teacher that was giving the grades of his child was, didn't look happy. He was 200 pounds overweight and was bitter about something, or at least he looked like it, and had no energy. And he thought, how could I possibly, have my child, see the world when the teacher that's teaching them, it doesn't seem happy about the world? What am I trying to give my children? That's sort of a tangent. But my point in saying this is that our children can learn to be a walking contribution at a very young age, and that we have to constantly train them and fight the cultural conditioning that being polite is no longer important or necessary for our success, for our fulfillment, for our joy. It absolutely is. Polite children have doors open for them. Polite children make themselves memorable. And when you're memorable, people remember you and think of what doors they can offer for you that you could walk into. Being memorable enforces their self-esteem. So that simple gesture of teaching them how to greet people, how to enunciate, how to be kind, how to be extra vigilant in the people around them could dramatically change the way they see the world and the world sees them. And it reinforces their ability to say, I'm responsible in how I show up in the world so I can bring light in this world, and that I am a valuable human being because my contribution actually makes a difference in the room, even as a young child. And that's how we need to constantly bring that awareness as parents to our child, that their effort to be polite, to go above and beyond to make people feel important and special by the way they respect them, is making a difference. And you point it out. You say, did you see how happy they were when you greeted them? Did you see that smile on their face? And then when you're walking into situations, whether it's the grocery store, restaurant, you prepare them and say, how do we act politely? How do we make people feel important? How do we, bring light in this room? And that becomes a culture that you create where you emphasize the need for living a life of meaning and contribution through the small gestures of act in how we show up for people. So I want to invite you all to join, us, parents, mothers, to reignite the call to be polite and really train children, train our children, create a culture in our home where politeness is revered and it is of great, and is given much magnitude in the way we train our children for the sake of becoming a light in the world and for the sake of actually bringing greater light in their world.